Okay, I think we're ready to rock here. Let me give you our readings for this coming Sunday. Here you go. We are still doing our sermon series titled Follow the Leader. I don't know if Pastor Ash told you this last time, but the series that we were... So here's how this works. The lectionary, or the pericope, or whatever you want to call it, that tells us what the readings are going to be for the appointed Sunday, right? And then with the new hymnal, the blue hymnal that we put out, our synod has put out some additional resources to help with worship planning, and one of those is that they regularly give you a clue as to the series that are going on already in the readings that are chosen. So this is the series that is already going on in the readings that are chosen. They're directing us towards. The title of the series that they had was The Need for True Followership, which is awkward enough in English, and then we would have had to translate that into Spanish as well for our purposes, so we decided to go with something a little simpler. We're just following the leader. But that we kind of miss out a little bit in that shift of the focus being on what it's like to follow. Anyway, so we're following the leader again this coming Sunday, and I'm going to plan on preaching on the James reading, so the epistle reading for Sunday. So let's start by looking at the Old Testament reading, and then we'll go to the Gospel, and then we'll come to the James reading at the end, Lord willing. So with that introductory matters out of the way, let's read now. It's a longer reading from Numbers chapter 12. Thank you for coming. And we're following the leader, right? We're following Jesus. So we have an example of something going on in the Old Testament leadership of God's people, and that's kind of the point of comparison that we're going to start with. But you're going to be watching for what kind of major theme is going to... Can you guess what the theme from the gospel will be on the basis of hearing this reading? Let's hear it. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses, they asked. Hasn't he also spoken through us? And the Lord heard this. Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. At once the Lord said to Moses, Aaron and Miriam, come out to the tent of meeting, all three of you. So the three of them went out. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance to the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. When the two of them stepped forward, he said, listen to my words. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams, but this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? The anger of the Lord burned against them, and he left them. When the cloud lifted from above the tent, Miriam's skin was leprous. It became as white as snow. Aaron turned toward her and saw that she had a defiling skin disease. And he said to Moses, please, my Lord, I ask you to not to hold against us the sin we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb with its flesh half eaten away. So Moses cried out to the Lord, please, God, heal her. The Lord replied to Moses, if her father had spit in her face, would she not have been in disgrace for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back. So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on till she was brought back. And that's where it ends. Do you remember this one from Sunday school? It's not one of the cute little stories that we tell. There's no animals going by their twosies into the ark. There's no way of kind of buttering and flouring this up. What stood out to you in that reading?
Well, that was kind of the standard way in which they treated people with leprosy.
So you're saying God's method of dealing with Miriam, now that she is leprous, it's a miraculous leprosy, but we're still going to treat it like regular leprosy. Even more so, so kicking her out of the camp, that would have been standard operating procedure for leprosy. You're right, because it's so highly contagious that the only thing you could do is have people with leprosy get away from the people with it. And so that's built into the Levitical code. That's built into God's laws for his people. He doesn't go there, though. You notice that God goes to, instead of the laws for clean, unclean based on skin conditions, he goes to laws based on clean, unclean, based on the need for the social hierarchy. And if what God is saying here is not like there's a rule for if a dad casually happens to spit on his daughter's face. It's not like that. What this is she is to be treated as if she is under discipline. Parental discipline. She is to be treated as if she has been publicly shamed for her sin according to the customs and laws appropriate for the nation of Israel. And then on the basis of that, when that is over, so we assume, so too will be her leprosy. You notice he doesn't say. Moses doesn't say after 7 days Miriam was cured. He doesn't say that. But if she's let back into the camp, she must have been. So the healing of Miriam is not the miracle that stands out to us. It's actually the affliction is the miracle that stands out to us in this reading. That all based on Joel's astute question. To notice that this is there's some rule following happening, but it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit different. God tells people what's going on in this situation. It's not regular run-of-the-mill leprosy, and it's also not regular run-of-the-mill discipline. We're going to handle it like this. Anything else stand out to you?
I have two questions.
Yes.
The first question is, where would Moses find a Cushite wife in this location? And my first instinct is to say that perhaps she left with them when they departed from Egypt. I don't know. But the other question I have is, was there anything mentioned in regards to who they should or should not marry at this time? And I guess that question springs from Miriam's offense to this, and I wonder if it's a racial offense or if it is just because Cushite women are not considered, elect Israelites. Sure. I don't know.
Yeah, there's some complexity there. The way I've traditionally understood this is that this is Moses' wife. He only has the one. What's her name? Is it Zipporah? Yeah, I was going to say Zipporah. Zipporah. She's a daughter of the priest of Midian. And so I think the most traditional way of taking it is that she's got Cushite heritage through that. Cushite may have been a way of describing someone's not necessarily family background, but physical appearance. It could just mean that she looked Cushite, in which case the issue is that she's black.
From Ethiopia?
Right. If we're offended that she looks African, basically, then we're offended that she's dark. And there's evidence in the Old Testament that this I'm fond of saying that our definition and understanding of the concept of race is a new thing, because it is. But there is racism and that kind of thing, obviously, in the Bible, and it does seem to center around light skin, dark skin, often. You look at, like, say, for example, Song of Songs, right? The beloved of the lover says, "I am dark but comely," right? Like I'm. And the reason for that, the reason sociologists will point to lots of different cultures have this idea that lighter skin is more desirable than darker skin, is that comes from rarity, scarcity, right? What is rare is going to be the most attractive to a culture, and so for what cultures is light skin rare? It's for the cultures that grew up under the hot sun, and where most of labor has to take place outside. So getting a tan is a way of showing people that you work hard, that you are a hard outside worker, and that's a great thing to be, except for that means that you're probably poor. And so that's why light skin is attractive, right? Because it means wealth, it means status, all that kind of thing. So is that what's going on here? Some people have oversimplified it to say that Miriam and Aaron are just doing modern racism in an Old Testament context. I think there's got to be more to it than that. I think maybe her physical appearance and perhaps even dark skin highlights for Aaron and Miriam that she is a goy, that she is a Gentile. And, in the midst of getting all these rules from God about what we do with Gentiles, maybe it kind of seems like a little bit of, but Moses gets to do whatever he wants. His wife just gets in or something like that. Even though she has been very committed to these rules even before God gave them to them. Like she was the one who circumcised Noah's son, in order to avoid God's wrath. So Zipporah's, there's no legitimate criticism of Zipporah. Maybe she's got dark skin, that's not legitimate. Maybe she's from a different nation, but that's okay because she's been adopted in just like you're supposed to, and maybe better than if by marrying Moses. There's just really no legitimate accusation that they have against her, and that gets a fine point put on it, right? That their criticism is characterized in this way. They're jealous. Has the Lord only spoken through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us? So they have a reason for their jealousy. One of the reasons for their jealousy is they don't think that Moses has a good wife or whatever.
I was just going to say,
yeah.
That as you were saying or explaining about the culture, that it almost appears now that I take a second look at it, that the issue wasn't really with the Cushite wife. It's kind of like a stone to throw because there really are, it's more like a power struggle. In verse 2, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us? Yeah. That seems to be the real...
So exactly like modern racism, there's no basis in reality for it forever, but it happens to be a handy thing that you can toss at somebody, right? And today it's a very handy thing to be able to label somebody as a racist and then forget everything they have to say. It's also a very handy thing for a certain group of people to say, well, they belong to the wrong race, and so therefore we have to deal with anything they have to say. It's been going on for forever. It was especially popular in Christian groups, I noticed, around Obama. Like, all of a sudden, race is an issue where it hasn't... No, that's not true. It's always been an issue with our presidents. But now, the way we see the issue has shifted so that he's different from what we're used to, and now all of a sudden everybody's talking about his race as if it matters. And that's been the way we've been doing politics ever since. It was before that too, but it became the kind of figurehead issue that it was under him. But again, it's illegitimate. It says nothing about the person to say, hey, I've noticed that you're from somewhere, or hey, I've noticed that you look like something. And okay, well, whatever. The real issue that we're scapegoating to be a racial issue is what we should actually talk about. And it's interesting too, I think, along those lines, that you get their issue with Moses as God spoke through us too, right? And then you get verse 3, which for some people, I mean, it's one of the most challenging verses of the entire Bible. What does verse 3 say? Or sorry, it's not verse. Yeah, it is verse 3. How? What? The most? The most? Who's writing this, by the way? Who wrote Numbers? Moses. Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. Are we going to let him get away with that? I think we are, and I'll tell you why. Because he said it, right? If he said it, he must have meant it. So there's a couple of different ways you can handle this. You can go the hyperbole route, which is not illegitimate. Hyperbole is a legitimate literary device. It is not lying to hyperbolize. It is not lying to say, like Luke did, that all of Jerusalem came out to see Jesus. No, they didn't. There were babies who were unable to do so, and they are considered part of Jerusalem. But we know what he means, and we even know it so well that we can't even call it lying, that he said something that we would say is not strictly speaking true, because it is true. What's true about it? Everybody who's anybody was there. Everybody was there. Okay, so is that what Moses is doing here? Is he using hyperbole?
I don't think so.
Well, it'd be negative hyperbole, right? Because in order to be the most humble, you have to have the least of something, right? So he's, right? And
kind of doubles it up.
He does say it twice, which Hebrew likes, so maybe it's just that. But he was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. I think the reason why we don't like that is because we don't understand what humility really is. If that bothers you at all, it's because you don't know what humility is. If that bothers you at all, it's because you're confusing humility with pride. Because it would take pride, I think, to say, I'm the most humble. So then I would have to be lying. That's how I think of pride and humility, isn't it? But it actually would take the most humility there is to say that you are the most humble. Because humility is really just honesty in disguise. Humility is honesty disguising itself as evaluation. Right? So if anyone could be the most humble person on the face of the earth, if there is such a person, which there must be, right? Somebody's got to be the most. There's somebody who's the most proud person on the face of the earth at this time. Somebody is. So it's got to be somebody, right? Only the somebody who it is could say it with humility. So what we're saying is, if Moses really is that humble, he would say it. Were you going to go somewhere, Matt?
Yeah, just on that note about his humility, that, when I think about the life of Moses, especially when he took the people out of Egypt, how many times he was tested by such a large number of people, and he always just kept falling on his face before the Lord. I just thought that was such a, it's not just stated that he is a humble man, but it's shown in so many areas, and that I just think it kind of helps to back that up.
Yeah, right. You look at the rest of what Moses has to write, and very, very little of what he has to say about himself contradicts this. There were moments when he did bad stuff. Obviously, he murdered somebody. That's bad. So can a murderer be the most humble? Yeah, I guess. Right? He's the most humble because he knows who he is. He knows where he stands, right? He's the most humble because he's in a position where he speaks for God. He does speak for God more than Miriam and Aaron do. And that's the first thing God points out, right? Has God not also spoken through us? And God sits them down and says, yeah, I did speak through you. But were you paying any kind of attention when I spoke through Moses? Did you notice it was different? Did you notice that it was one of the reasons why it was different is because of how humble he is? Who else has God shown even his backside to, right? Who else has God spoken to face like this, right? So Moses is humble enough to be in that elevated position and not think more highly of himself. And how can he do that? Well, God does it to him, right? God takes him and puts him right next to God, and so we're talking face to face, and that's a truly humbling thing.
Another comment I thought about was, Miriam saying in the song Exodus 15, and it's kind of a shocking thing here that somebody who could sing that beautiful song, that she's now in the situation where she's opposing really the Lord, who put Moses where he put him. I think that there's something for us to sit back and ponder that a second,
For sure, yeah. The way Miriam gets singled out here then draws in what else we know about Miriam. Why doesn't Aaron get leprosy? Why only Miriam? There's a bunch of reasons for that. But anyway, there's something special about what's going on here with Miriam, and that makes you think of where has she been at before? Isn't Miriam the little girl sitting in the reeds, looking at a basket that has her brother in it, thinking, I'm going to watch him die? And then a queen of Egypt comes down and plucks him out of the water. And then Miriam comes rushing up to her and says, you know what? I know somebody who's nursing. That's Miriam. Miriam sings the beautiful song, leads the Israelite women in song after they cross the Red Sea, a song that gets echoed later on and even in Mary's own song, Miriam's a big deal. She's a hero of faith. This is a bad spot in her career, right? And then you think about Aaron, he's got one of those bad spots too. Maybe that's the reason why he doesn't get leprosy, because he already had to go through the golden calf thing. And the golden calf thing was punishment enough for him. Now you got to lead these people. You got to be the high priest of these people after you did that. You were their high priest in pagan worship while God was talking to Moses. And maybe that's why Aaron doesn't even need to be leprous to be called to repentance. Maybe he's right there all the time. Maybe he's always just right there,
I also thought
Go ahead.
too that his response where he says, please my Lord, I ask you not to hold against us the sin we have so foolishly committed, that the Lord got his point across either way. He didn't actually have to do that to Aaron. He made his point known, and it registered for him.
Yeah. I'm noticing this as a parent too, that this is just good. This is good parenting. We're going through a phase right now with my son in particular, where it is punishment enough that he be aware that he made a grave mistake. I don't have to put him in timeout after that. I don't even have to raise my voice. It is often the case where he'll do something, and all I have to do is say, here's what you just did, and that is enough. He will burden his own conscience plenty after that. I don't need to do it anymore. I felt like God. No, I think that's Aaron in this reading. God can basically ignore Aaron, and Aaron's going to get the point. Miriam needs a little bit of a push, and I think not just a little bit of a push for her sake, but probably for everybody's sake. Miriam needs to have leprosy after challenging Moses' authority, and she needs to spend a week outside the tent for herself and for everybody else. This is a timeout that is very useful for everybody. Aaron doesn't need that. God's a good parent, I guess, is what I'm saying. And God also knows who's the most humble, and he can be the one to allow Moses to let that, to let that line sit for the next 4,000 years so that we can read it. If God would not have let Moses get away with writing that if it weren't true. And if it weren't useful for us to hear. Let's move on. Let's read a little bit further. Let's get to the gospel lesson. I think you can guess where we're going, right? The gospel is on the back side of your worksheet, or I'll put it up on the screen in just a second. It's Mark 9. What kind of following of Jesus do you think we're talking about if we just read Numbers 12? Let's go to Mark and see what we have here. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." Not exactly a Sunday school staple either, right? It's kind of feels like in-betweeny. It feels like an in-between the stories type situation. There's no real story happening here. But it's an interesting reading. What stood out to you? We have Jesus telling his disciples, warning them about how things are going to play out. Verse 32 is really interesting to me. Maybe it's interesting to you. The context for this brief little conversation that the disciples are too ashamed to even say what their part was. The context for that is Jesus told them about the crucifixion and the resurrection. They don't understand and are afraid to ask him about it. Why?
My first thought, which could be wrong, but my first thought is that they don't want to be wrong, because if they're wrong, they're not considered the greatest.
If you're the dummy who had to ask Jesus, "What did you mean when you said that?" then you're right. In the conversation that they're having, that they shouldn't have been having, where they're arguing about who was the greatest, you've lost that argument before it's even started if you ask Jesus. If you show Jesus that you didn't know. Why? Why is that? I had a classmate in seminary who is actually my brother's pastor right now in Atlanta, Georgia, Lucas Bitter. I called him out online now. Lucas Bitter was my classmate. He's pastor now in Atlanta, Georgia, of In-Town Lutheran Church. He's a great guy. I loved sitting by him in class. He was my favorite person to sit by. We in the back of class, we had a standing desk that we would take turns so that we could, because it's a long day of sitting. And so he and I would often stand in the back and we would talk a little bit. And the reason why I loved being by Lucas in class was he was unafraid to sound dumb. He would rather learn the answer than keep quiet and have people think he already knew. So sitting next to him in class meant that you were going to learn something too, because he was going to voice the question that everybody was too proud to voice. Everybody was too proud and thinking like, I have to show this professor that I already know stuff, That's what my job in this class is. And Pastor Bitter did a great job of not thinking that, of not thinking that being in class was time to show the professor how much he knew, but it was time to learn stuff. And so he asked questions. And he was never afraid of sounding dumb with his questions. And I learned so much just from sitting and watching that happen. I think that's what's going on with the disciples here, right? That now that we're comfortable with Jesus, now that he's our leader and we're following him, and following him is who we are, so much so that you just call us a disciple. You just call me somebody who learns from Jesus. That's all I really do. That's all I really am. Okay, we're really comfortable. We're really settled in, so much so that Jesus has started talking about the end. And he waited until he was comfortable with his disciples before he could do that. So that Peter could say something dumb like, "No, Lord, this is never going to happen to you." And Jesus could say, "Get behind me, Satan." And that could be okay. Like they could work through that because they're comfortable together. They're in a free fire zone, so to speak. You can say what's on your heart and you're going to be okay. But now here, that also means that they're very comfortable with each other, and that there's like a hierarchy going on there, right? They know that Judas is a thief. They know that Matthew is taking diligent notes. They know that John is young and quiet. He's really paying close attention, though, if you talk to him for 2 seconds. They know, the disciples know each other very well, right? And they know that it is not safe to ask a dumb question. Not because Jesus is unsafe, but because my fellow learners are unsafe. What would create a situation where you feel unsafe because of the other people in the class with you? Well, it's one where you either think that they think that they're better than you, or you think that they are better than you, and you don't want to prove it. So it would be better to keep quiet and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. That's my favorite saying. I said that to somebody once when I was an angry teenager. This girl was talking to me, and I said, "Have you ever heard this saying?" I was so mean. That was not cool. But her response was, "What?" And that made me so happy that she didn't get it. I'm a bad person. I'm sorry. But this is what it is, right? They're afraid not of him, but of each other, because they're having a pride argument already, and that's how that primes us for where things are going to go. Mark's style is growing on me this year because we're reading through Mark's gospel so much. But I meant like here, right? We go from they're afraid to ask him about that, no transition, whatever. They arrive in Capernaum. What were you talking about on the road? It's interesting that Mark lets us find out when Jesus would have found out if they had said anything. What were you talking about? You ask that to find out. Jesus isn't asking that to find out. He's asking them so that they sit there in silence. This is their timeout, like Miriam had. He doesn't ask them. He asks them because he knows that they know that he knows what they were talking about. That's why he asks them. This is a who told you that you were naked type question, right? This is God saying, I know the answer to this, but let me ask you so that you'll think about the answer to this so that I can just move on to the next point, because that's actually what I wanted to get to. Okay. So, if you had to put those two readings together, Numbers 12 and Mark 9 here, what are we talking about? Followers of Jesus are like what? Like, if following Jesus well means doing what? It means being what kind of follower? We have negative examples in both of those readings, right? Don't do it like Aaron and Miriam. How did they do it? Don't do it like the disciples. How are they doing it? How are they following Jesus in a way that's not good? What do you think?
lording it over the others.
Why are you following Jesus? Is it for you? I mean, yeah. Who isn't following Jesus for themselves? But what is it that you want to get from Jesus for you? Do you want to get a spot in line behind a bunch of people? Maybe in front of some people. Do you want to get a spot in line that's definitely in front of some people? Do you want to get a spot in line behind Jesus where you know exactly what kind of person is behind you, and you know exactly what kind of person is in front of you, and you could probably get in front of them, right? But that person in front of me, they've got a Cushite wife. I should probably move a little further up in the line, right? That person in front of me was dumb enough to ask a question, showing that he doesn't already know. I already know. I should probably move in front of the line. They can go behind me, right? That's the kind of following of Jesus that we have here. And it's so natural. What do you do when you're standing in line? You stare at the other people around you in line, right? You try not to let them see that you're doing it, but that's what you do. There's nothing else to do. Oh, now you can take out your phone. Well, try not doing that. Okay, anyway. So you're comparing yourself with the other people in line. It's this comparison thing. It's this pride, humility thing that we're trying to figure out. How does that fit into a following Jesus type situation, right? You're following a guy who went to his crucifixion. How do you follow him with pride? That's probably not going to work. It doesn't match. It doesn't fit. No? That's me? Just me?
Oh, that's true.
Okay. Okay. Let's go to the text I want to preach on. This Sunday I only picked James 3 because I've never preached on it before. I looked in my database and I have 2 sermons on that verse that you just read from Mark 9. Or no, I have 1 sermon from the passage you just read on Mark 9. Two from Mark 9, 1 on Numbers 12. I've never preached on James 3, so let's try it. Let's read it and see what it says. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Short and sweet there from James. What stood out to you? We'd better start with that. I'm planning on preaching on this, so a bunch of things have stood out to me already. What about you? Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I noticed that he says the deeds that are done in humility come from wisdom. And I know the wisdom James is speaking of, right? The wisdom that comes from putting our faith in Jesus Christ alone.
Yeah.
I guess is one way I could put it. Yeah. But I like that humility follows wisdom, because without the wisdom of God, without knowing that He's God and we're not, we can't have any humility. I mean, the natural man doesn't have true humility. It's you could even go so far as to say it's almost just manufactured.
Right. The overlap that we were talking about before, right? We were saying, like, what I said before, what is humility if not honesty? Pretending to be an evaluation. Right, so wisdom is along those same lines too, and so that, like, wisdom, the basis of wisdom is honesty too, right? It's knowing the truth. You cannot be wise unless you know the truth. And so it starts with smart, and then goes to wise, and then goes to humble. So, but like there's the truth is the thread that's between all of those. Go ahead.
Well, in connection to that, I like the humility coming from wisdom, because with the last reading, talking about the little child he sets in front of him, I mean, I'm thinking of my children, the younger ones especially right now, that they actually have humility every time they come up and tug on us and say, I want milk, you know? Yeah. And that it takes humility to say, I can't get it myself. I don't know how to unscrew that milk jug and whatever else. But that comes from the wisdom, knowing that I know, my wisdom tells me that speaking of my children, that my parent is going to give me what I ask, because they've done it a million times before.
Right. So I'm wise enough to know what I want and have the words to ask for it. I'm wise enough to know where to get it from, and all that requires honesty, being honest with myself about where I am in the grand scheme of things. You know, Socrates said, "He who is wise, the wise man who knows that he knows nothing." Right? And that's along those same lines. So humility is just wisdom about yourself. You have the correct information, but you also know what to do with it. And so there are deeds that come from humility. In fact, you can only see humility in somebody's deeds, in what they do. It's really hard to see it in what they don't do. It's really hard to notice somebody not doing something. Or maybe it's so easy that you just can't even force your brain to do it. I've noticed that nobody else is coming. And it's continuing to happen. But that's kind of useless to notice that thing that's not happening. Anyway, so you want to show that you are wise, act humble. It's kind of a paraphrase of what James is saying. James's letter is very much about pride. It's very much about how there's just not any room for it. He says, you tell me with pride that you have faith. Show me, I say. Don't tell me. And then that will be humble. The way you tell me that you have faith in a humble way is by doing humble things. The way you tell me that you have faith in a proud way is just say, I have faith. Thanks, I'm good. I'm set. No more help.
One of the things that came to my mind just now was what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 2, where he said, I did not come to you with lofty speech or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling in my speech. I like that, because Paul could have came with a lot of superior mental wisdom, right? Yeah. But yet he came knowing that they wouldn't benefit from that, because that's all they've ever had. And Jesus gives us a different spirit than the world comes with, where we don't come thinking we're the great know-it-alls. We're just the ones who have received what God has given us. We've been blessed. We've been receiving grace, undeserved. You know, that word undeserved is so good, because it's all about not having anything great in us. Right. You know.
Exactly. And then James will take that and pit it against envy and selfish ambition. That's the combination that he is concerned with here in this section. These things that go together: bitter envy and selfish ambition. And selfish ambition comes back up again, where that same envy and selfish ambition, where those are, you find disorder and evil practices. So James, who's very much concerned about believers doing stuff, is also very much concerned about because you're going to be doing stuff is the thing. So you can either do good stuff or bad stuff. You can either do pride stuff or you can do humility stuff. You can do foolishness stuff or you can do wisdom stuff. But you're going to be doing stuff, right? I was reading this book called Ordinary I don't know if you've heard of it. I love it. It's so good. It's by a Calvinist, but I don't hold it against him. He's accidentally Lutheran a bunch of times, and he really has kind of skewered me and my very Lutheran heart a couple of times. But the premise is that we want our churches, we want our religion, we want everything to be really exciting, and that's probably not what's good for us. In fact, well, think about when have things been really exciting around Bethel in its history, right? When were things really exciting? They were really exciting when Bethel first got started. You know why? Because there was a schism, a church split in near half. That's super exciting. That's thrilling. And everybody hated it. Everybody involved in it. Why? Because it was bad. It was bad. A church family got divided in two. And we got the better deal, I think. We got nicer land. Anyway, so when things are really exciting, that's actually bad. But the premise of the book was, one of the things he was saying is that ambition has become a virtue where we once only saw it as a vice. Julius Caesar got stabbed to death for his ambition. You can't have, they were the Romans, Brutus, Cassius, and Gaius got together and they said, look, we can't have a leader who's so ambitious. We got to murder him. That's how the ancients used to think about ambition. We don't think about ambition that way anymore. Why not? What has changed? Who's the person who wins in capitalism? It's the ambitious. Who's the person who gets to be a politician at all? It's someone who has ambitions. And we see that as ambitions are how you achieve things, and that's not entirely wrong. It's or maybe I should say it is accurate, but it's not good. Right? I don't want somebody to be president because they want to be, because it has always been their dream to be. I want somebody to be president because they're actually going to be good at it. But probably the people who would be good at it don't want to be. You know why? Because they don't have any ambition to be. If you don't have any ambition to be the president at all, you probably are the only person who should be allowed to be. You know? But this is where we've gotten with ambition. And the other side of the coin that this book was pointing out to me was that contentment is a vice in our culture. Right? Because having contentment is bad. That's the thing that's keeping you from achieving your ambitions. If you were less content and more ambitious, you would achieve more. Yes? That's what we think. That's what we teach our kids. That's what school is telling my children right now. If you were less content with what you already know and more ambitious to learn more, you would, and it'd be easier, and the job of the teacher would be easier. Why am I ranting about this? Wisdom and contentment are in the same category, not according to James. Wisdom and humility and contentment, those are the things that we want, and you do stuff when you have those. Content is not just sitting there and doing nothing and just taking your lot in life, right? Contentment, if I'm content with what I have, then I will work hard to maintain it and to take good care of it. And I could even call that my ambition. My greatest ambition in life is just to do a good job taking care of what God has given me. And part of doing a good job is being content with having it in the first place. Right? If you dwell on this with wisdom a little bit, you start to realize that how selfish ambition and envy really are kind of the root of all of the things that I do that are wrong. And we're talking to believers. We're not. How do we fix the world? Get rid of ambition? That's not going to work. We're just talking about you, dear believer. Do you want to be wise? I mean, that's kind of how James frames it. James gets kind of, maybe it's just because of the translation, or maybe it's just because of the words we choose in English or something. Like, he sounds so angry. Maybe it's just that way I read it, right? Let's give him a different tone, right? It's not like, you say you have faith, but you're full of it because you don't have deeds. No, it's more like, okay, would you like to be wise? Who is wise and understanding among you? It's almost inviting the comparison that the disciples were doing, but in like a better way, right? In the way that goes not like, how do I match up in this group? Instead, in this group, who do I notice that stands out in a good way? How do I be more like them? Like, that kind of a comparison is actually super healthy, right? So instead of like, which one of us is the greatest? It's me. No, it's me. No, it's me. Instead, it's like, which one of us is the greatest? It's you, and I want to be more like you. So you are wise and understanding. I've noticed this about you. You are wise and understanding. How do I know this? Well, I see it in your good life, in the deeds done in humility, and that comes from wisdom. And so, like, I want to imitate you. Not out of envy, not out of selfish ambition, but because I know where the stuff that I admire in you comes from. It comes from heaven. If you are wise and you are understanding and you show it in your good life, in deeds done with the humility that comes from wisdom, what are you doing? You're showing me that your way of life comes from heaven. You're showing me that your thoughts come from heaven. You're showing me that your faith comes from heaven. You're showing me that your deeds come from heaven. And I want to do that. Why? Because that's my stuff comes from heaven too. Anything that I have that's worth anything comes from heaven. Sorry, I've rambled for a long time about that. Does that resonate with you at all? Did anything stand out?
I was going to say something to that. I hope I can articulate this all right, but clearly, James, it seems, at least when I read him, he has a way of kind of drawing out the legalist in me, because when he says, "Oh, who is wise and understanding among you," and then he goes into explaining how you are or become wise and understanding. Well, then he says, well, let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility. So then my desire is to seek out what those deeds are so I can do it. Yeah. So then I can achieve it on my own. And I think what's so good is going back to that child picture again, like the children don't rationalize following their parents like we shouldn't try to rationalize following God. We just know he's good. Mm-hmm. And so we follow him because we know that that he has the best in store for us. And then everything else flows out of that. Right. I mean, I don't want to sound too overly pietistic in that, because we do need to know what those things are, so that we can follow them. It doesn't just come by the Spirit kind of idea, but
you're noticing like this cooperation, which is a fraught word to use, but this life of a Christian is a cooperation with the Holy Spirit. That we're not talking about conversion, not talking about coming to faith. We don't do anything for that. But now that that's what you have, you are cooperating with the Holy Spirit, right? And so you notice when there is selfish ambition in you, and you say I'm bringing that to the table. We don't like that, but that comes with me. And then the wisdom and the humility, we know that does not come from me, that comes from the Holy Spirit. And we're trying to, manage a life in which all of those things are all going on all at once. And I think that's one of the reasons why we go with wisdom rather than intelligence, right? We would talk, in our day and age, we much prefer talking about intelligence than about wisdom. Because it's so much easier to define, right? And you just know the right stuff, right? But kids don't know the right stuff. Why would that be your example of not only faith but wisdom? Kids don't They don't know anything. You have to tell them everything. There's how many times I've uttered a sentence that I'm pretty sure no one else has ever said in the whole wide world. Please do not put your socks in your brother's shirt while he's wearing it. Like, that's a weird thing to have to say. But the reason I have to say it is because they don't know. They don't know that you don't do that. Do I even really know why you don't do that? While I'm saying it, it makes so little sense to me. It's just you just don't put your sock. What are you doing? Why how? Right? We don't know. But the thing about wisdom is you don't have to. You don't have to know things to be wise. Isn't that cool? Or anyway, you don't have to know everything about anything to be wise. Because if you are wise, you already know that you don't know everything about anything. And so if you're wise, what do? You know not everything, but you know what works. You know not everything, but you know that you don't know everything. Maybe I'm too much of a pragmatist, but I think wisdom is fundamentally practical, and I think that's what James is getting at. Faith is practical. Wisdom is practical. In the sense that you put it into practice. It's something that you do, and you don't ever get it 100% right either. You don't get to say, "Well, I made the wise decision," the only one, because if we're talking in the realm of wisdom, there are decisions that are less and more wise, maybe, but there isn't a wisest. I don't know, not usually. Yeah.
One of the things that kind of struck me, I think it was the last time we sung "Jesus Loves Me, This I Know," is how profound and deep that hymn is. Whereas I've always before taken it as it's kind of simple, but what a wise way to put our faith into words that does sound very simple, so that a child can grasp it. And yet a profound, wise adult can digest it and come to the same conclusion by faith, by grace, that's what we are, and that our God is this and this and this for us, and that we can say that, whereas the wise scholar thinks it's a joke. He thinks it's foolish.
What a beautiful creed that little children's hymn is.
You could literally write an entire sermon on that hymn.
Oh, yeah.
And it would be amazing, because it's got everything packed into it.
Right.
And the little kids, and we love to sing it, The Lord's given us that childlike trust in him and love that we're comforted by it.
Right. Yeah, and then on the other side of the coin that I kind of lament, especially as a church worker in particular, is why do we grow out of that? Why do we think? Look, this is another thing this book did, right? So it was talking about evangelical Christianity. I think he's Presbyterian is the guy. Anyway. So he's talking about how church used to be one thing for everybody. The worship service. You can go back to Jesus even. Synagogue worship. There was one thing for everybody. You get an explanation of God's word. And sometimes, and often in case in synagogues, it would be, that would go to dad, and he would bring it home, but it was for everybody. It was his job to bring it home. And then we moved to churches doing a bunch of things for everybody. We added Sunday school. That's so that church can be for everybody for kids. And Bible class, that's so church can be for everybody for people who like school. And class, and then all this, it's like church is for everybody, but we start carving things up. And then now what you notice, especially in mega church, but in mainstream evangelicals, right? What do they do? There's the kid, get the kids out of worship, onto a playground or whatever, because adult attention is what we care about, and that's at a premium, and it's hard to have adult attention when you have kids in the room and all this other stuff, right? And then we are shocked when the kids become adults and they don't know how to transition. They don't know how to give up coloring and animals by their twosies in a way that replaces that with lifelong study of the Word on your own. That handoff, we don't know how to do. And the book was highlighting that the reason why we don't know how to do it might be because it can't be done. Because we took Christianity and we made a version of it that's for kids while they're kids. And then what's going to happen? That's going to run out because childhood runs out. And then you also are running out of Christianity. And then on top of that, the worship style has become much more youth groupy. Because what happens? We gave the kids youth group, we gave the children their thing, and then we discovered that we can't help them transition. We don't know how to do that, so now we have to have youth group. And what do you do for a youth group? Well, you have church, but for teens, which is a weird thing that's not even like a real thing. Adolescence is not a separate thing than childhood. It should be included in childhood, or we should ignore it completely. That's what I think. Anyway, we have these youth pastors who dress like I'm dressed right now, but with more tattoos, and they lead the people who are just a little bit younger than them in some version of church that is specifically catered to them. And then when they get to become adults, they want church to continue to be that, and so the pastor has to be somebody who's just a little bit older than them, who dresses a little bit more trendy than them, and has a little bit more tattoos than them, and then and has a band and all that kind of stuff. And it's like what we've done, permanent youth group. And if you do that, you follow that path, you never figure out how to sit in a room like this. You never learn how to do that. You never learn how to do what we're doing right now, which is just chatting about the Word, rather than having somebody just tell you what you're supposed to memorize, and then at some point you're going to get tested on it, maybe. Right? Well, why am I getting so hung up on this? I don't remember. I think Matt started me on it. Let's blame Matt.
There was a danger.
Yeah.
I think what you're kind of hinting on too is that there's a danger in our culture of making church into an activity and also, just kind of like a social gathering rather than an actual true worshiping of the Lord.
Right.
Well, anyways, not to get off on this, but in the 1920s, there was actually a big transition from churches going from German to English in our WELS synod, right? And there were actually, that transition included activities that were more Americanized in order to Americanize them, so that there was actually bowling alleys put into the basements of churches. And thankfully they put a stop to it all. But what I saw as I was reading these things progressing was this sort of culture of fun. Not that you can't have any fun at church, but you know what I mean? It all these extracurricular activities replaced, or were attempting to replace what we should be coming to church for. Right.
And it all, like I'm saying, it all comes from a good place, right? You want kids to feel comfortable at church. How do you do that? You give them fun. Right. But then if fun becomes the only thing that you give them, then it will be the only thing they ask you for. And when you offer them something that isn't fun, like church discipline, or even just regular attendance, repentance, like if you offer them something that isn't fun, they go, well, that's not what I came for. And I say, well, who gave you the idea that you should be coming here for anything other than fun? And they say, you did. You're the institution. And then I can say nothing, because it's true. We're out of time. We're going to leave it there? Not really. I'm not going to leave it there. What? Here, let's leave it with James, huh? He does list what this wisdom is like. And so, remember, he's listing in a context of humility, right? So he's describing humility. Why do you think, first of all, pure? Don't answer, just think about that. Then, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy, good fruit, impartial, and sincere. It really seems like pure is the thing he pulls out, and then those other things, which are also good, we would have to talk about in a sermon on this text. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Look at the top verse on that slide and the bottom verse on the slide. I think that they go together. So the reason James is making this point the way he's making it is, where you find bad stuff, there you'll find bad stuff happening. That sounds like a stupid way to put it, I guess. Where there is envy and selfish ambition, where there are these bad motivators, you find bad activity. That is the other side of James' coin. You have a good motivator. It's faith. That's the best motivator there is. Where you have that good motivator, you will find good activity. Where you have these bad motivators, you will find bad activity. Where you find peacemaking, you will find righteousness. What's he saying? You be the change that you want to see in the world, kind of. More so, it's just like humbly know your place. Be humble enough to be wise. Be wise enough to be humble, and to know that if you want things to go well, do well. Is it more complicated than that? It's really not. Like James is kind of just, you know?
I'd like too that he's saying in verse 18 that, as you kind of said, that, peacemakers who sow in peace, you get the harvest, which is a beneficial harvest. You get a good outcome.
Yeah. If God gets righteousness, then we all get it. If God gets us to be a bunch of peacemakers, then we all get peace. So this is it's not selfish ambition that leads to it. It's not I want what I shouldn't have. It's I want what I'm supposed to have. Because I'm on team God. And so if God says that we get more peace, the more peace I peace, then let's peace the peace.
Well, isn't it for the other person too that benefits? Because I don't want to, I guess at the end of the day, in verse 17, if I want to be wise, it's not so that I am wise, it's so that somebody benefits from that. You know what I mean? Right. There's too much of this, I think, in our culture of, what can I gain for myself so that I, for myself, can have X, Y, and Z, instead of what can I learn so that I can pass it on so the next person can have it.
Yeah,
Right.
Maybe even a bit the question often, and this is the one that comes back to definitely in Paul, and I think in James too, is the question is not really what do I do so that I get or whatever. It's just who am I? Who do I want to be? So that I can then be that? Yes, of course. I want to. Yeah. But even more, if I'm being a peacemaker, then other people are getting the peace that I make. And that's what I want to be. I want to be a peacemaker. I want to be somebody. And so it does enter into that internal external struggle. I think that's what the letter that James's letter is all about. Is that internal versus external struggle, right? You don't want to be selfish because so you have to think about what you're doing enough to not be selfish, but not so much that you're being selfish. So it's this internal, external struggle. I got to be motivated internally by the love that God has put there in order to externally put love out there, right? It's complicated, I guess, is really kind of the message. But it's not complicated because we have to get it right. I think maybe that's the difference between wisdom and intelligence, really. Intelligence is really about just what's the correct answer. We'll worry about all other evaluations afterwards. First of all, what's the right, correct, accurate, honest answer. That's all intelligence really concerns itself with. But wisdom says, okay, well, having the correct answer is only useful if it does something. No. We better close, because I'm gone way over your time, and I thank you for your wonderful attention. Let's close with the prayer of the day for this coming Sunday. Please pray with me. Mercifully grant, O God, that your Holy Spirit may in all things direct and rule our hearts, for without your help we are unable to please you. Through your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Thanks, y'all. I'm going to run up and turn off the live stream, but otherwise you guys can hang out as long as you like.